Hello dear friends and dear viewers. This is video master Yuriy Krykun from Ukraine. I have already produced two video courses for TheChessWorld.com and they are mostly devoted to the endgame. Now I'd like us to cover the very exciting and new topic, which would be positional sacrifices. In this video course I would aim at showing you the positional exchange sacrifice, piece sacrifice and a pawn sacrifice, and we would start with the exchange sacrifice in these videos. I decided to divide them and separate them by the openings and types of pawn structures where the sacrifice were used. So now we would start with the evergreen Sicilian, where of course many of you would already get the idea of what is the sacrifice on which square it would happen. We will take a look at the games that I really like, played between Karyakin and Rajabov back in 2008. It's so Dragon Variation, a4 c5, knight f3, d6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, g6. It leads to very sharp and complicated play, even so of course there is plenty of theory nowadays which has more or less well, not really exhausted the independent moves and attempts by players, but definitely makes a great impact on them. So it's pretty difficult to get creative here nowadays, unfortunately. Castles, bishop to c4. There's another line with castling when black usually goes d5, but we wouldn't really get in detail about that, so let's look at bishop to c4, bishop to d7, castles, rook to c8, and now bishop b3, knight d5, king b1, a6. This is all theory, and after h4, h5, g4. If someone is interested, you could easily look the moves and other possibilities up in the database. I would just like us to concentrate on the main topic and focus on the of the video. So here white one g4. The most aggressive attempt going all in, so to speak, since white sacrifices quite a lot here. Bishop to h6 is another move that was essayed, for instance, in the game between Anand and Carlsen in Mainz 2008. But after knight to c4, takes, like white took, went rook e1, and the pretty complex and equal position, I think rather balanced position appeared, and pretty soon in the game they agreed to a draw. Nothing much has happened. Rook e8, queen a5, pretty soon white traded queens and the position the endgame was roughly equal. Players agreed to a draw quite soon. But we'll return to the move g4, h4, h5. If white is willing to prove something, he needs to sacrifice pretty much everything here. And there was another game, so in the stem game rook to g1 was played, there was another one which saw bishop to h6. And I have attached this game in the PGN, so you can take a look if you'd like to. But we'll take a look at the main game first. So rook to g1, and after queen to a5, bishop to h6. I would already like to ask you, what is black's next move? How should black continue here? What do you think? What are black's candidate moves and the possible ideas for him? So there were quite a lot of continuations here. For example, one of the first moves to appear, I think, was rook to c5. And another possibility that black had tried here was rook to c3, played between the same ever existing opponents, Anand and Carlsen, in the same 2008. That was another game when Anand already went for sacrifices, and here it's interesting to study how this game went. Anand, of course, could have captured on c3, but that wasn't really his idea. I think black has a few possibilities here, and for example, it's possible to go rook to c8, or maybe try to somehow capture on h6 and then capture on c3, even though that definitely looks rather dangerous. Oh, but I think there is actually another pretty interesting idea to take, and I'll capture here, for instance. The point being that white is forced to go queen c1, for example, and black can take. And the rising position is very complex, of course, but I think black should be doing quite alright. Should be just doing perfectly fine, I think. So, Anna just ignored Carlsen's last move and took on g7 himself. And after king g7, the question is, how should white continue? I would actually urge you to stop the video and calculate variations here because they are highly interesting, entertaining, and useful for your chess growth. Yes, so white has a few candidates, and it's possible to capture on c3, but I think that would definitely mean that black is the first one to start some assault, so I took on h5 instead. I hope you have found this move. The idea being that after gh5 there is a check, taking h7, white can capture a few pawns with checks, now check, and the simple mate would just win the game instantly. That is quite simple. But after rook h5, black of course didn't take there, he took rook b3, and now it captured the queen. Black took on b2, took and took on h5. And as you can easily see, black managed to obtain quite a few pawns. Well, he had a rook, a minor piece, and a few pawns for the queen, which seems to be more than enough, right? Because at the moment he has 3 pawns. But unfortunately, after white's next powerful move, f4, the problem is that the knight is hanging, and also, of course, if the knight retreats, white would be able to capture the rook. Also, this pawn is hanging in many lines, so black's position falls apart, and pretty soon white won. And you can easily find this game in the PGN and check it out. It's extremely, I think, thrilling and exciting. But returning to this position, now I hope you have a slightly better understanding of what are the possible problems for both sides, and maybe you would be able to come up with black's next move right now. So how did black continue instead of rook c5 and rook c3? Rajabov's next move is very powerful, and it was a novelty back in the day. He went bishop to f6, sacrificing an exchange as well, but in a different way, trying to save this crucial bishop so that it can influence the upcoming battle. Rajabov's move was a novelty back in the day, but pretty soon it took over as the very main line, and nowadays I believe the vast majority of the games that reach this position would definitely see bishop to f6. To be honest, it can definitely seem that black's play is very provocative because obviously the 2 files are already open and white seems to be simply much faster, but things prove not to be that simple. And in the game we took fg4, but I believe it could be also interesting to look at the following variations and at the following possibilities. White can play queen to d1, for example, another interesting move. The point being that white just wants to capture or to go knight to d5, which would be highly unpleasant, obviously. So I think black has a few options here. For example, rook c3. Actually, it's funny to see the following possible repetition showed by the ignorant machine. Bishop g7, and after queen d2, bishop f6, queen d1, and now bishop to g7, which would be quite amusing, I think, in such a position. Obviously, the humans treated differently. So, for example, rook c3, or actually knight f3 is another possibility, which is highly exciting. And after knight f3, I think, yeah, actually, even though I would be showing some of the moves quite fast, I urge you to think about the position and not to take them for granted. So here, black can capture on c3, for instance, and after, say, bc3, queen c3, e5, something like d5. Now, if white captures, there would be a huge problem after e4, when the mate is probably just inevitable. So I think white would go something like queen to d2. For instance, black can take, and now we can stop and look at the arising position. Actually, that is a very interesting thing, and there was a very classical game played in the dragon variation in such a way that after some attack, black ended up a rook down for this huge mass of pawns on the king side, 5 pawns for the rook. which is obviously very exciting as this position is, well, incredibly fresh and rare. I think you are not likely to get it that often, and I think it's of course extremely difficult to evaluate it, but I think black is doing fine and has a full share of chances here. The pawns are extremely dangerous. But another line that I have studied here is rook takes c3 finally, so queen d1, rook c3. For example, yeah, once again, bc3 is probably not something white wants. Say knight f3, and now queen c3. I don't think white was looking forward to getting such a position, or black could simply even consider capturing on c3 in many lines. So after rook to c3, I think white should... Actually, I would ask you what to do as white as well. Uh, yeah, I think of an interesting move here, trying to save the pawn structure from deteriorating, prevent it from being completely spoiled, is bishop d2. And then black can, for instance, go rook c8. That's a very ballpark line, which I just wanted to demonstrate quite fast to give you an idea of how things tend to develop, how sides should usually fight this battle in this line, say fg4, knight f4, and after something like bishop c3, black would invest one more, sacrifice g5, bishop g7, and I think the position would be very, very sharp, and one of the lines I have studied was queen d2 attacking the knight, now knight h3, queen c3, queen c3, bc3, knight g1, rook g1, and something like e6. And that was, of course, very fast. Now you can breathe in a relieved way. So now we have a pretty cold endgame when black has a pawn for the exchange, right? And as we can see, all of white's pawns on g5, on e4, on this doubled pawns are pretty weak. The bishop is, I think, rather useless. So in my opinion, black can definitely hope to get a considerable counterplay. And I think that this game is likely to end in a draw because it would be difficult for black to make progress. So it would be for white. So it seems to be roughly equal in balance. But let's return to the game, which was just a monumental battle after f takes g4. Black took, bishop f8, rook f8, king f8, queen e3. And now one more question, what should black do right now? Yes, I hope you have found the following move, and that probably wasn't that difficult considering the topics that we have been discussing at the moment. At the same time, obviously, it's never that easy to sacrifice even more material. Rook c3 is the right move, I think. And after queen c3, bc3, we get the following position. And it's time to stop here and discuss it. So white has obviously two extra exchanges. At the same time, black has a very nice compensation in terms of two pawns, a much better pawn structure, very active pieces, and the full absence of the open files for the white rooks. There is just nothing the white rooks can do. And for instance, this extra pawn, so to speak, that white has on the queen side versus black's pawns doesn't really matter at all, and it's only black who can play for a win here, in my opinion. At the same time, I think it's interesting to return here and say that such a move as, say, e6 was possible as well. For example, white prevents this and now something like queen c5. The idea would be to just retreat with this knight and tackle that knight, say c3. And here I think we could repeat moves with something like, say, bishop f3, rook h3, bishop g4. Once again, obviously, you need to think yourself quite a lot here, but in such positions it's always worse after arriving at some conclusions, checking your thoughts with the engine, because obviously in such a sharp position everyone is prone to miscalculating. So rook c3, and after queen c3, bc3, we get this endgame, which in my opinion is just better for black. e6, bishop c4. The point is that the bishop here was entirely useless, and obviously it didn't fancy being restricted by the pawn, so white attempts to relocate it to e2, trying to support the king side. And my question would be, what would you do as black? I think there are a few possibilities here, but I would just like you to take your time to think and come up with something interesting. I think that black had a few interesting possibilities. In the game he took, and after rook g4 went bishop e5, we'll return to this shortly after. But I think in such a position it's important to acknowledge which minor pieces are good and which ones are bad. So for example, this bishop is definitely white's main problem. Say this knight on d4, even though it's not attacking anything, as we can easily see, right? It's definitely centralized and could pose problems in the future, even though not now. But the bishop would be a very difficult piece to improve on statically. So I believe that white, of course, should try to trade it, but black should have simply prevented bishop e2 by means of knight f4. A very strong positional move, I believe. And after knight f4, black would simply remain with a clear advantage. But he decided to take, and after rook to g4, bishop e5, rook g2, b5, he still keeps the advantage thanks to white's numerous pawn weaknesses and a total absence of plan. I would like to emphasize on that. We would see this in many more examples to come, which are devoted to the exchange sacrifice and actually to very many positional sacrifices. It's very often it's the case that you sacrifice something not in order to win the game instantly, but to make sure your opponent is just completely deprived of any constructive plan, which is obviously a very unpleasant thing to face in a practical game. What can you do if you just need to wait, basically, for your opponent to strengthen his position? I believe that the ancient would say here that it's just 0-0-0, according to many lines, that it's a positional draw, that neither side can actually make significant progress, but obviously black has many ideas here. He can try to prepare many pawn moves. I actually wanted to show one or two, but I wouldn't, since we would need to guess these moves later on. But I think that white is definitely suffering from a lack of plan here. It's very uncomfortable. So rook to f2, and after king to g8, I actually think that knight f6 would be another interesting move. Say rook to f1 and just king to g7. For example, knight to c6. Now black can play something like knight e3. The point being that black just wants to rejump with some knight to g4. Either of the knights, rook e1. No, there is such moves as knight to g4. It's just knight to g4, and even bishop g3 actually is very good. Or say rook, I don't know, pretty much anywhere. And now I think there would be knight g4 and bishop c3, which should do the job. So after knight d3, probably white would just sack this exchange back, knight f1, rook f1, d5. And the point is that black attacks this pawn, and also he has an idea of just running the g pawn all the way up. Of course, it should be supported with the king, so since the pawn on e4 is hanging, white should go rook e1, I think, and now just g5. And I think black is clearly the strongest side. It would be actually very interesting to discover what is happening in the position after say king to b2. I guess g4 is right, king b3, and white would try to create some counterplay connected with c4, whilst black would attempt to just queen his pawn. And I think that definitely would be a very interesting battle, but let's not get into this at the moment. I mean, our task isn't probably to exhaust every single variation with the possibility still the very end, right, and establish the outcome. Our task is to understand and appreciate what are the difficulties and the problems and possible ideas that a practical player faces in the tournament games. So we return here. Black decided not to rush the matters with king to g8. White went a4, an interesting move trying to get counterplay, since what white wants to do is spoil and split black's pawns, and then he hopes to somehow be able to pick them up, or get an open b file for his rook. Black took, king a2, knight f6, rook e2, and now I would ask you a question: what should black do right here? I hope you had thought of it. Indeed, we need to hurry a little bit to make some progress. So what Black did, finally it's time to pay attention to the pawn moves. So what Black did is d5. The idea being that of course he should not really wait till White would improve his position as well. White had found some means of how to get counterplay, so d5 is right, threatening the pawn on e4. White absolutely has to capture now knight d5. The pawn on c3 is threatened, and obviously there isn't much fun for Black. White and rook h3. And I would like us to discuss this position, but before that, well, Black has a few good continuations here, to be honest. I think there is one that I like most of all, but there are a few decent ones as well. How should Black continue? Yeah, I think that, of course, knight f4 is a move that you've spotted, all of you should have spotted. And after, say, rook h4, knight d2, knight d2, White does get the exchange back. Sorry, Black does get the exchange back, of course. Say knight to d2, now rook a4, now some g5. And I think it would be pretty difficult for White to save this game, because the g-pawn is extremely fast. At the same time, the move Rajabov made here is even stronger, I think. He went bishop d4, a very, very powerful decision, and this is definitely the one for all of you to pay great attention to. cd4, knight f4. Now, the point is that Black had simplified the position, now he gets the exchange back, and now, as we can see, the knight prevents the king from coming to e3 as well as the rook, and now Black simply went g5. Of course, White could try to play something like rook c3, but the point is that even if White will get this pawn, he simply wouldn't be fast enough, would he? And after something like the simple knight to b6, for instance, I think it's actually possible to go even farther with something like knight to d2 here. The point being that what Black wants to do is just king g6, king g7, g6, f5, g4, g3. The knight can help us promote the pawn from e4. Yeah, so the position would be close to being winning for Black. White went rook g3, and after f6, rook c3, knight d2, rook to d3. I think that if White tried something like rook c6, actually he could have, and the question would be, what would you do as Black here? Indeed, I think it's worth simply defending the pawn after king f7, say rook a6, not just push it. And now the point is that if the rook takes on a4, or for example if White gives a check first, king g6, now takes, Black just can play something like king f5 and he should be able to simply win the game, or White could capture immediately, but it would be barely possible to fight the pawns after something like f5 anyway. The point is that, say c4, we can just go g3, rook a3, f4, and it's not really possible to stop the pawns. Black is just much, much faster. I mean, he just promotes basically on the next move, c5 falls into g2, or even something like rook to d3 falls into g2, or if White tried rook c3, Black would be able to simply play g2 again after rook c1. I think there is very many moves available, this wins easily, and another option I could actually even prefer is knight c4. The point being that White can't of course capture, the pawn would become a queen, and if White doesn't, then Black just prevented White from any counterplay connected with the c pawn. But, of course, these are unnecessary finesses, and Black wins in every single possible way. So, rook to d3, knight e4, c4, king f7, c5. And surprisingly here, Rajabov made a mistake which should have almost let the victory slip away. How should Black have played here? Black went g4 in the game, and surprisingly there is barely a win after this move. It's barely possible to find one. I think he should have started with king to e7. The point being that now say rook h3 trying to get counterplay, then just g4, rook h7, king d8, and the point is that White needs to watch out for this pawn, and I mean for the couple of pawns, while his c pawn is not really threatening, we just go g3 and it's not going anywhere. You can play c7, but then you're just not in time. So white could have, of course, tried to come with the king there somehow, but as we can see, the knight covers a lot of squares, so it would be barely possible for white. Well, it would just take too much time, and white doesn't have it. For instance, f5. Now see king a4, f4, king a5. And now the move g2 would simply result in a loss after king b6, unfortunately, because rook h8 is coming. But black has a nice way to finish this game and win. How should he continue? Yep, that's right, king b7 would be the right move, preventing king b6 from happening, and then the pawns just promote. So this would just win, which is why king e7 was the right move. While after g4, it's surprising, but after the following sequence, king e7, and now it went d5, takes, c7, king d7, took, king c7. It's very, very surprising and unbelievable. Black has 4 pawns for the exchange, but it seems that there is no victory. After rook f4, black on king d7. Uh, the point being that if white takes, well, that was the idea, that white takes, and now f5. White, as we can see, cannot go rook to f4 because of g2. A very messy position, isn't it? And after something like rook to e1, for example f4, rook to g1, or king e6, say king b2, and now for instance king f5, king c2, and now king g4, king g2, f3, king e3. And it's very surprising that black doesn't have a victory, despite the fact that he has so many pawns. But white went king b2 here and lost after king e6, a very powerful continuation, king f5, and the black king is able to make it there in time. Black just put the pawn on a2 so that the white rook lost all of its maneuvering possibilities, and since the f pawn is promoting now, white just had to call it a day. In my opinion, that is a tremendously monumental battle with a very interesting and powerful novelty in bishop to f6 in this position. And if some of you play Dragon, you could definitely pick great value from this move and these explanations. And if you don't, for some reason, you can also, well, probably get inspired and give it a try yourself. And then what had inspired me personally, most of all, is the second exchange sacrifice with the brilliant rook to c3. Actually, white, Sergei Karyakin, even though he lost the game, he defended very well, and as we can see in the end, in the positions that seemed entirely lost, he even managed to find a chance and almost save the game. To be honest, I'm thoroughly amazed at this game with so many interesting nuances. But I think that we have managed to cover many ideas which are typical of these positions after the exchange sacrifice. And the main ideas here are, first of all, just to do a short recap, the white rooks don't have any open files. Black has a much better structure, white structure is spoiled, and black has possibilities to improve his position by making the call moves such as improving his king, or actually preparing some pawn advances in the future, right? Which means that white is deprived of counterplay, and black has the possibilities to improve his position and take his time to achieve this small improvement step by step, while it's very unpleasant, even psychologically, to wait and be deprived of any counter chances for white here. So I hope you have enjoyed this video, which was the first part of the series, well, of this part of the course devoted to the exchange sacrifice, and we will take a look at a few next videos later on. I look forward at a few next examples in the next videos, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope you have enjoyed it. It was FIDE Master Yuriy Krykun.